In a quiet suburban town where life usually moved at a slow pace, an unexpected incident shattered the calm and ignited a storm of emotions. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Michelle Johnson, a hardworking single mother, was driving her 10-year-old daughter, Amara, home from school. The sun was shining brightly, casting golden rays across the neatly trimmed lawns and tree-lined streets. Everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. As Michelle approached a four-way stop sign, she slowed down carefully, ensuring she followed all traffic rules. But before she could proceed, flashing red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Her heart sank as she pulled over to the side of the road. Officer Mark Gray, a stern-looking man in his late 40s with years of service under his belt, stepped out of his patrol car. His expression was unreadable as he walked toward Michelle's vehicle. "License and registration, please," he said curtly, peering into the window. Michelle complied without hesitation, handing over the documents while trying to remain calm. Sitting beside her, Amara fidgeted nervously, clutching her backpack. She had been quietly admiring her own reflection in the side mirror earlier, proud of her afro puff hairstyle adorned with colorful beads, a style she loved because it made her feel unique and beautiful. But Officer Gray's attention soon shifted from Michelle to Amara. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the young girl's hair. "What is that?" he asked sharply, pointing at her head. Amara froze, unsure how to respond. Michelle quickly interjected, explaining that it was just a hairstyle, nothing more. But Officer Gray wasn't satisfied. He muttered something about school policies and professionalism, though neither Michelle nor Amara understood what he meant. Before anyone could react, Officer Gray did something unthinkable. Reaching into his utility belt, he pulled out a pair of scissors. Without warning or permission, he leaned into the car and grabbed a section of Amara's hair. The sound of snipping filled the air as strands of her carefully styled afro fell onto the car seat. Amara gasped, tears welling up in her eyes as she watched pieces of her identity being cut away. Michelle screamed, demanding to know what he thought he was doing, but Officer Gray ignored her protests. The whole ordeal lasted less than a minute, but its impact was devastating. Amara sat trembling, her hands covering her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. Michelle felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and helplessness. How could someone treat a child this way? What gave him the right to humiliate her daughter over something as trivial as hair? Back at home, Michelle tried to comfort Amara, who kept asking why the officer had hurt her. The sight of her broken-hearted daughter fueled Michelle's determination to fight back. She picked up her phone and recorded a video recounting the day's events, making sure to show the remains of Amara's once proud hairstyle. With shaking hands, she uploaded the clip to social media, hoping to shed light on the injustice they had endured. Within hours, the video went viral. Comments poured in from people across the country, expressing outrage and support for Amara and her family. Some shared their own stories of discrimination, while others called for accountability. The small-town incident had suddenly become national news, drawing attention to deeper issues of bias and inequality. And as the world watched, one question lingered in everyone's mind. Who exactly was this little girl whose courage sparked such a powerful movement? Little did anyone know, including Officer Gray himself, that the answer would change everything, for better or worse. The hours after the traffic stop felt like an eternity for Michelle Johnson. Her mind raced with anger, frustration, and fear as she tried to comfort her daughter, Amara, who sat curled up on the couch, tears streaming down her face. The once vibrant afro puff that had made Amara feel proud now lay in uneven tufts around her head, a cruel reminder of what had happened. Every time Michelle looked at her, her heart broke a little more. She couldn't shake the image of Officer Mark Gray leaning into their car, scissors in hand, cutting away not just hair, but also a piece of her daughter's dignity. Determined to protect Amara from further harm, Michelle decided to take matters into her own hands. She knew they couldn't let this injustice go unchallenged. Sitting at the kitchen table, she pulled out her phone and began recording a video. In it, she recounted every detail of the incident, The unnecessary traffic stop, the officer's harsh words about Amara's hairstyle, and the shocking moment when he cut her hair without permission. Her voice trembled with emotion, but her message was clear. This wasn't just about hair. It was about respect, humanity, and standing up against discrimination. To make sure people understood the gravity of the situation, Michelle showed close-up shots of Amara's damaged hair and shared snippets of the original style before it was ruined. "This is my baby girl," she said, her voice cracking. She didn't deserve this. No child deserves to be treated this way. As she spoke, Amara stood silently beside her, clutching her mother's arm for support. Though she was still too shaken to speak, her presence conveyed volumes about the pain they were both feeling. When Michelle uploaded the video to social media, she didn't expect it to spread so quickly. Within minutes, comments started flooding in, hundreds, then thousands. Strangers from all over the country expressed their outrage, calling Officer Gray's actions unacceptable and praising Michelle for speaking out. Some parents shared photos of their own children wearing similar hairstyles, emphasizing how these styles celebrated cultural identity and self-expression. Others recounted personal stories of facing discrimination because of their appearance, creating a wave of solidarity with Amara and her family. As the video gained traction, hashtags like #JusticeForAmara and #HarrisNoToCrime began trending online. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting it on national television, and sparking debates about systemic racism and police misconduct. Protesters gathered outside the local police station, holding signs that read "Respect our children" and "End racial bias now." Even teachers and students from Amara's school joined the movement, organizing a peaceful march to show their support. Despite the growing attention, Michelle remained focused on her daughter. She spent hours talking to Amara, reassuring her that none of this was her fault. "You are beautiful just the way you are," Michelle told her, brushing her fingers through the remaining strands of Amara's hair. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small or ashamed." Slowly, Amara began to open up, sharing how embarrassed she felt during the traffic stop and how scared she was when the officer leaned into the car. Hearing her daughter's words only deepened Michelle's resolve to fight for justice. But amidst the chaos, Michelle couldn't help but wonder if there was something she was missing, something bigger that could turn the tide in their favor. She remembered vaguely that Amara's father, Derek Johnson, might have connections that could amplify their cause. Though he lived far away, due to his demanding career, Michelle knew it was time to reach out. Little did she know, involving Derek would bring an entirely new dimension to their battle, one that no one, especially Officer Gray, could have anticipated. The fallout from the viral video hit Officer Mark Gray like a tidal wave. What he had initially dismissed as a routine traffic stop was now front-page news, with headlines painting him as a symbol of unchecked authority and racial insensitivity. The weight of public scrutiny bore down on him, and for the first time in his career, Mark felt the sting of accountability. But instead of reflecting on his actions, he doubled down, convinced that he was justified in what he had done. When called into an internal affairs meeting at the police station, Mark sat stiffly in his chair, his jaw clenched and his arms crossed defensively. His superiors peppered him with questions. "Why did you cut the girl's hair? Did you have any legal basis for your actions? Was this really about enforcing rules, or something else entirely?" Mark fumbled through his responses, insisting that Amara's hairstyle violated a vague dress code policy at her school. "It's unprofessional," he argued, though no one could find evidence of such a rule existing. His colleagues watched silently, some exchanging uncomfortable glances. While some officers privately agreed with Mark's old-school mindset, others recognized the danger of his behavior. One senior officer leaned forward, his voice firm but measured. "Mark, you're not just dealing with a child here. You're dealing with a community that feels betrayed. Whether you meant to or not, your actions reinforced stereotypes and hurt people." But Mark wasn't ready to listen. He clung to his belief that he was simply upholding standards, ignoring the fact that those standards were rooted in bias. Outside the meeting room, Protesters continued to gather, their chants echoing through the halls of the police station. Signs reading "Protect our kids" and "No justice, no peace" lined the streets, amplifying the pressure on the department to act swiftly. Local leaders demanded answers, threatening investigations if the matter wasn't resolved promptly. As the days passed, whispers spread among Mark's fellow officers. Some distanced themselves from him, fearing guilt by association. Others openly criticized his lack of remorse, pointing out that even if he believed he was right, his methods were reckless and damaging. A younger officer named Lisa approached him during a coffee break, her tone cautious but direct. "Mark, you've got to see how this looks. People aren't mad because of the haircut. They're mad because it feels like another example of us targeting kids who look different." Mark brushed her off, muttering something about liberals exaggerating everything. But deep down, doubt began to creep in. For the first time, he found himself avoiding eye contact with neighbors and skipping his usual morning walks around the block. The once respected badge on his chest now felt heavy, a constant reminder of the backlash he faced. Friends stopped inviting him to barbecues, and his wife grew quieter, unsure how to defend him when their own son asked why Daddy had hurt that little girl. Meanwhile, journalists dug deeper into the story, uncovering inconsistencies in Mark's account. They interviewed Amara's teachers, none of whom had ever raised concerns about her hairstyle. They spoke to students, many of whom admired Amara's confidence and creativity. Slowly but surely, the narrative shifted further against Mark, painting him as someone who acted out of prejudice rather than principle. One evening, as Mark sat alone in his dimly lit living room, scrolling through endless news articles about the incident, he came across a comment section filled with outrage and curiosity. Readers were speculating about Amara's father, wondering where he was and why he hadn't stepped forward yet. Mark scrolled past casually at first, but then something caught his attention. Someone mentioned that Amara's dad might be someone important. The comment gnawed at him. Who exactly was this man? And why did it seem like everyone except him knew something significant? As much as Mark tried to dismiss the thought, unease settled in his gut. Something told him that whatever storm he was weathering now was only the beginning, and that the truth about Amara's father would change everything. As the story of Amara and Officer Mark Gray continued to dominate headlines, journalists began digging deeper into the life of the young girl at the center of the controversy. It didn't take long for them to uncover a surprising detail that sent shockwaves through both the media and the public. Amara's father was no ordinary man. His name was Colonel Derek Johnson, a highly decorated officer in the U.S. Army known for his leadership, integrity, and unwavering commitment to justice. Derek had spent nearly 2 decades serving his country, rising through the ranks with distinction. He had led missions overseas, earned medals for bravery, and worked tirelessly to promote equality within the military, a cause close to his heart. Despite his demanding career, Derek always made time for his family, staying connected with Michelle and Amara even while stationed abroad. When he received Michelle's panicked phone call about the incident, he listened intently, his voice calm but firm as she recounted every painful detail. "I'll be there as soon as I can," Derek said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "This isn't just about Amara. It's about protecting her future and everyone else's who might face something like this." True to his word, Derek immediately requested emergency leave from his post overseas. Within days, he arrived back home, stepping off the plane in full uniform, his polished boots clicking against the pavement, his chest adorned with medals that spoke volumes about his service. The sight of him sent a ripple of awe through the crowd waiting at the airport, including reporters eager to capture his reaction. But Derek wasn't interested in giving sound bites or posing for photos. His focus was singular, ensuring justice for his daughter. When Derek walked into Michelle's house later that evening, Amara ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. For the first time since the incident, she felt safe. Derek knelt down to meet her eye level, brushing a gentle hand over her uneven hair. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But let me tell you something. You are strong, beautiful, and loved. Don't ever forget that." After spending some time comforting Amara, Derek turned his attention to Michelle. Together, they strategized their next steps. They knew they couldn't fight this battle alone, so Derek reached out to influential friends and allies in the military and civil rights communities. By the time he scheduled a meeting with the police chief, support for Amara's case had grown exponentially. The day of the meeting arrived, and Derek walked into the police station with Michelle by his side and Amara holding his hand. Every step he took radiated authority and dignity, his presence commanding respect. As they entered the chief's office, all eyes turned to him. Even seasoned officers seemed taken aback by the sight of a man whose reputation preceded him. Colonel Johnson. The police chief greeted him cautiously, extending a hand. Derek shook it firmly, but kept his expression neutral. Without wasting time, he laid out the facts of the case, emphasizing how Officer Gray's actions weren't just an isolated incident. They were symptomatic of larger issues of bias and misconduct within law enforcement. "I joined the military to protect people like my daughter," Derek said, his voice resonating with quiet power. "And yet here we are, in 2023, still having to fight for basic human decency. This stops now, not just for Amara, but for every child who deserves to feel safe and respected." He went on to share personal stories of facing discrimination himself, recounting moments when he'd been judged not for his abilities, but for the color of his skin. His words struck a chord, leaving the room silent except for the occasional shuffle of papers. Before concluding, Derek issued a clear ultimatum: either hold Officer Gray accountable and implement meaningful reforms, or prepare for national scrutiny, as he planned to share Amara's story with major news outlets. As the meeting ended, it was evident that Derek's intervention had shifted the dynamic entirely. The police department found itself under unprecedented pressure, not only from the public, but also from someone whose dedication to justice could not be ignored. And though Officer Gray remained defiant, he couldn't shake the feeling that the tide was turning against him. Little did he know, the real reckoning was yet to come. The confrontation between Colonel Derek Johnson and the police department left an undeniable mark on everyone involved. The weight of Derek's presence, combined with his ultimatum, forced the police chief to take immediate action. Officer Mark Gray was suspended without pay, pending a full investigation into his conduct. Sensitivity training programs were hastily announced for all officers, but it was clear that these measures were only the beginning of what would be a long and difficult process. For Mark, the suspension felt like punishment enough, or so he thought. But as days turned into weeks, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He couldn't escape the whispers from colleagues or the cold stares from neighbors. Even trips to the grocery store became unbearable, with strangers recognizing him and muttering disapproving comments under their breath. Everywhere he went, he felt judged, not just as an officer, but as a person. The once unshakable confidence he carried now seemed to crumble under the weight of public disdain. One evening, sitting alone in his dimly lit kitchen, Mark stared at a photograph of himself in his uniform, taken during his early years on the force. Back then, he had joined the police department with noble intentions, to serve and protect. Somewhere along the way, though, he had lost sight of those ideals. His rigid views on order and discipline had blinded him to the humanity of the people he swore to serve. As he reflected on this, a pang of guilt hit him harder than ever before. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. Desperate for redemption, Mark decided to reach out directly to Derek Johnson. It wasn't easy. Pride fought against humility every step of the way. But after drafting and redrafting a letter countless times, he finally sent a heartfelt message expressing his desire to apologize, not just to Derek, but to Amara as well. To his surprise, Derek agreed to meet him privately. The meeting took place in a quiet park, far away from prying eyes. Derek arrived in civilian clothes, his towering frame exuding both strength and calmness. Mark approached cautiously, his hands trembling slightly as he extended one to shake Derek's. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. Derek nodded but didn't smile, letting the silence linger as a reminder of the gravity of the moment. They sat down on a bench overlooking a small pond, where ducks glided peacefully across the water. Mark hesitated before speaking, choosing his words carefully. I want to say I'm sorry," he began, his voice cracking. "What I did to your daughter, it was wrong. I can't undo it, but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt her." Derek listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Mark finished, there was a long pause. Finally, Derek spoke, his tone measured but firm. "Apologies are important," he said, "but they don't mean much unless they're followed by action. Do you understand why what you did was harmful? Not just to Amara, but to the entire community." Mark nodded slowly, tears welling up in his eyes. "Yes, sir. I do now. I didn't think about how my actions would affect her, or anyone else. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I failed. I failed as an officer and as a human being." Derek leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing yet compassionate. "You have a chance to make things right, to educate yourself, to listen, and to change. That's the only way forward. My daughter deserves better, and so does everyone else who looks like her." As they continued talking, Mark opened up about his upbringing and the outdated beliefs he had inherited from generations past. Derek shared his own experiences of overcoming prejudice, emphasizing the importance of empathy and understanding. By the end of their conversation, Mark felt a flicker of hope, a fragile but genuine desire to grow and do better. When they parted ways, Derek left Mark with one final piece of advice. "Change starts with you. Prove it, not just to me, but to yourself." Though the road ahead would be challenging, Mark knew that this meeting had marked the beginning of a new chapter. Whether he could truly redeem himself remained to be seen, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of purpose. And for Derek, seeing even a glimmer of sincerity in Mark gave him hope that healing was possible, not just for his family, but for the fractured relationship between law enforcement and the communities they served. In the weeks following his meeting with Colonel Derek Johnson, Officer Mark Gray made a decision that surprised many, including himself. Determined to prove he was serious about change, he began volunteering for community outreach programs designed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and marginalized communities. At first, his presence was met with skepticism. Residents eyed him warily, unsure whether his newfound willingness to help was genuine or just an attempt to salvage his reputation. But Mark pressed on, showing up consistently and humbly, ready to listen rather than lecture. One of his first assignments was at a local youth center where kids from diverse backgrounds gathered after school. The program aimed to foster trust between officers and young people through activities like basketball games, art workshops, and open discussions about policing. On his first day, Mark stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure how to approach the lively group of children playing outside. A boy dribbled a basketball past him, pausing briefly to glance up. "Aren't you the guy who cut that girl's hair?" the boy asked bluntly. The question hung in the air, drawing curious stares from others nearby. Mark swallowed hard, feeling the familiar weight of shame creep back into his chest. "Yes," he admitted quietly, "I am. And I'm very sorry for what I did." He knelt down to meet the boy's gaze, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "It was wrong, and I'm here because I want to do better, not just as a police officer, but as a person." The boy studied him for a moment before shrugging and tossing him the basketball. "You're on my team," he said simply, running off to join his friends. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to Mark. For the rest of the afternoon, he played alongside the kids, laughing and sweating as they competed in friendly matches. By the end of the day, some of the children had even started calling him by his first name, a sign, however small, that he might be earning their trust. Meanwhile, Mark also reached out to Amara and her family again, this time hoping to make amends directly. With Derek's permission, he visited their home one Saturday morning. Amara opened the door hesitantly, her expression guarded as she recognized him. Mark crouched down to her level, holding out a small box wrapped in colorful paper. Inside was a handmade bracelet adorned with beads, similar to those he cut from her hair. "This is for you," he said softly. "I know it doesn't fix what I did, but I hope it shows how sorry I am." Amara glanced at her mother, who gave a slight nod of encouragement. Slowly, she took the gift, her tiny fingers tracing the smooth surface of the beads. "Thank you," she murmured, though her voice still carried traces of uncertainty. Michelle watched silently from the doorway, her arms crossed but her eyes softening slightly. She appreciated the effort, even if forgiveness would take time. Derek later joined them in the living room, where Mark reiterated his commitment to change. "I've enrolled in cultural sensitivity training," he explained, "and I'm working with organizations to educate other officers about biases they might not realize they have. I don't expect you to trust me overnight, but I promise I'll keep trying." Derek nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the sincerity in Mark's words. "Actions speak louder than apologies," he reminded him. "Keep doing the work, and maybe someday we'll see real progress." As weeks turned into months, Mark became more involved in initiatives promoting inclusivity within the police force. He advocated for policy changes regarding discriminatory practices, using his position to amplify voices that had long been ignored. Though some colleagues dismissed his efforts as unnecessary, others began to follow his lead, inspired by his determination to grow. For Amara and her family, life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. Amara grew her hair back, styling it in ways that reflected her personality and heritage. She still carried scars from the incident, but she also found strength in knowing her story had sparked meaningful conversations about respect and equality. And while Michelle remained cautious around Mark, she couldn't deny the positive shifts happening within the community, shifts that might never have occurred without the courage of her daughter and the persistence of someone willing to confront his own flaws. Though the journey toward healing was far from over, one thing was clear: redemption wasn't impossible. With every step forward, both Mark and the community learned that change, no matter how challenging, was always worth pursuing. Months had passed since the incident that changed everything, and while scars remained, so did hope. Officer Mark Gray's efforts to rebuild trust didn't go unnoticed. His consistent presence at community events, his willingness to listen, and his advocacy for policy changes began to soften some hardened hearts. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when people turned away or muttered under their breath. But Mark persevered, knowing he owed it not just to Amara, but to everyone who felt marginalized by the system he represented. At the same time, Amara and her family found themselves at the center of a growing movement. Michelle became a vocal advocate for children's rights, speaking at schools and community forums about the importance of embracing cultural diversity. She often brought Amara along, letting her share her story in her own words. At first, Amara was hesitant, gripping her mother's hand tightly as she stood before audiences. But with each speech, her confidence grew. "My hair is part of who I am," she would say, her voice steady despite her young age. "It makes me feel proud. No one should ever be made to feel bad for being themselves." The turning point came when a local lawmaker approached Michelle after one of these talks. Inspired by Amara's courage, the lawmaker proposed a new piece of legislation aimed at protecting students from discrimination based on hairstyles. The bill, nicknamed Amara's Law, sought to ban schools and workplaces from enforcing biased grooming policies that disproportionately affected Black individuals and other minorities. News of the proposal spread quickly, reigniting public interest in Amara's story and underscoring its broader implications. As the City Council prepared to vote on the bill, support poured in from all corners of the community. Parents, teachers, activists, and even former skeptics rallied behind the cause, recognizing it as a step toward greater equality. Mark, too, played a role, testifying during a council meeting about how his own ignorance had led him astray, and why laws like this were necessary to prevent similar incidents in the future. His testimony carried weight, not because of his title as an officer, but because of his humility and willingness to admit fault. For Derek, seeing his daughter become a symbol of resilience filled him with immense pride. He attended every hearing, standing tall beside Michelle and Amara as they navigated the spotlight. Yet, what touched him most was witnessing the impact their fight had on others. Strangers approached them in grocery stores and parks, thanking them for standing up and paving the way for change. One woman tearfully shared how her son had faced bullying over his dreadlocks. Another recounted being sent home from work for wearing a head wrap. These stories reminded Derek why they couldn't give up, even when the road felt long and uncertain. Back at home, life started to feel lighter. Amara laughed more freely, her once timid demeanor replaced by a quiet strength. Her classmates admired her newfound confidence, and many began experimenting with their own hairstyles, celebrating individuality instead of conformity. Michelle noticed subtle shifts within herself too, a renewed sense of purpose and empowerment that came from fighting for something bigger than herself. Even Mark found solace in the progress being made. Though forgiveness from Amara's family was still a distant goal, he took comfort in knowing he was contributing to a better future. His colleagues, once critical of his involvement in outreach programs, now joined him in volunteering, inspired by the tangible difference they saw in the community. Slowly but surely, relationships between law enforcement and residents began to heal, not fully, but enough to spark optimism. When the day finally came for the city council to vote on Amara's law, the room buzzed with anticipation. Families packed the space, holding banners and wearing t-shirts emblazoned with slogans like "Hair has no rules" and "Celebrate diversity." As the votes were cast and the bill passed unanimously, cheers erupted throughout the chamber. Amara clapped excitedly, her eyes shining with joy, while Michelle hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Derek stood proudly beside them, his heart swelling with gratitude for his daughter's bravery, for the community's unity, and for the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, the Johnson family knew they had sparked something meaningful. What started as an act of cruelty had transformed into a beacon of hope, proving that even in the darkest moments, light could shine through, and that healing, though imperfect, was always possible. The passage of Amara's law marked a turning point not just for the Johnson family, but for the entire community. The legislation, celebrated as a landmark victory, sent a powerful message about the importance of respecting cultural identity and rejecting discrimination in all its forms. But beyond the headlines and applause, it was the personal transformations that truly defined the legacy of this movement. For Amara, life began to feel lighter. Her once broken confidence blossomed into something radiant. At school, she became known not just as the girl with the hairstyle, but as a leader, someone who inspired her peers to embrace their uniqueness. Students started showing up with braids, twists, afros, and head wraps, celebrating their heritage without fear of judgment. Teachers took notice, incorporating lessons about diversity and self-expression into their classrooms. Even the principal, who had initially avoided commenting on the controversy, proudly displayed posters supporting Amara's law in the hallway. For the first time, Amara felt like she belonged, not because she blended in, but because she stood out. Michelle, too, found herself transformed by the experience. What began as a mother's fight to protect her child evolved into a mission to uplift others. She partnered with local organizations to host workshops for parents and educators, teaching them how to foster inclusive environments for children of all backgrounds. Her advocacy earned her recognition, including an invitation to speak at a national conference on racial equity. Though she never sought fame, Michelle embraced the platform, knowing it gave her a voice to inspire change far beyond her hometown. Derek remained steadfast in his role as both a father and a champion for justice. His military service had always been about protecting others, But now he saw new opportunities to make an impact closer to home. He worked alongside lawmakers to ensure Amara's law was implemented effectively, traveling to neighboring cities to encourage similar measures. When asked why he dedicated so much time to the cause, Derek's answer was simple. If we don't stand up for our kids today, what kind of world are we leaving for tomorrow? As for Officer Mark Gray, his journey toward redemption continued. While some still viewed him with suspicion, many acknowledged the sincerity of his efforts. He became a mentor within the police department, guiding younger officers on how to approach situations with empathy and understanding. During community events, he often shared his story, his mistakes, and the lessons he'd learned, hoping to prevent others from repeating his errors. Though forgiveness from Amara's family remained elusive, Mark accepted that healing took time. For now, he focused on being part of the solution rather than the problem. The ripple effects of Amara's law extended far beyond the small town where it originated. Other states began considering similar legislation, citing the courage of one little girl and her family as inspiration. Social media campaigns erupted, encouraging people to share photos of themselves embracing their natural hair or traditional styles. Celebrities joined the conversation, amplifying the message that beauty comes in infinite forms. What started as a single act of defiance against injustice grew into a nationwide celebration of identity and resilience. On the one-year anniversary of the incident, the community gathered at the park where Mark and Derek had first met. This time, the atmosphere was joyful rather than tense. Families picnicked under sunny skies, children played games, and musicians performed songs celebrating unity. Near the center of the park stood a mural painted by local artists, a vibrant portrait of Amara with her hair styled proudly, surrounded by words like courage, respect, and change. As Amara stood in front of the artwork, holding her parents' hands, she smiled brightly, knowing her story had sparked something extraordinary. Though the scars of the past would never fully fade, they served as reminders of how far everyone had come, and how much further they could go together. The battle wasn't over. Systemic racism and bias still existed, lurking in subtle corners of society. But for the Johnsons and their community, hope burned brighter than ever before. They had proven that even in the face of hatred, love and determination could prevail, and that sometimes the smallest voices carried the loudest truths. And so, as the sun set over the park, casting golden hues across the smiling faces of friends, neighbors, and strangers alike, one thing was clear. Amara's courage had ignited a flame that would continue to burn, for justice, for equality, and for every child who deserved to shine exactly as they were.